My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 37 years old, and for many years, I believed I had a happy family. I lived in a quiet neighborhood in Ohio with my husband, David Mitchell, and our two children, Madison, who was 12, and Noah, who was 8. From the outside, our life looked perfect. We had a nice house, stable jobs, and healthy children. People often told me how lucky I was. They saw family photos on social media and smiling faces at school events. They thought we were the perfect family, but they didn't see what happened behind our front door. David wasn't always the man he had become. When we first met, he was kind, patient, and funny. He used to bring me flowers for no reason. He made me feel special. He made me feel loved. But over the years, something changed. At first, it was small comments. "Why are you always so forgetful?" "You worry too much." "You make everything complicated." I told myself he was just stressed from work. Then the comments became more frequent, more painful, more personal. Sometimes he criticized the way I cooked. Sometimes he laughed at my ideas. Sometimes he corrected me in front of other people. Every time it happened, I found an excuse for him. I didn't want to believe my marriage was changing. Most importantly, I wanted to protect my children from conflict. So I stayed silent. I smiled. I pretended everything was okay. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Friday evening. The whole family was sitting around the dinner table. I had spent nearly 2 hours preparing everyone's favorite meal: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh vegetables. For a little while, everything seemed normal. Madison was telling us about a science project she had worked on at school. Noah was making everyone laugh with silly jokes. Even David seemed relaxed. For the first time in weeks, I felt hopeful. Maybe things were getting better. Maybe we could be happy again. I stood up to bring the last serving dish to the table. As I walked toward David, my hand slipped. The ceramic bowl fell from my hands. Crash! The sound filled the room. Pieces of the bowl scattered across the floor. For a moment, nobody moved. I looked down at the broken pieces. My face turned red. "Sorry," I said quickly. "It was an accident." Then David laughed. Not a kind laugh. Not an understanding laugh. A cruel laugh. I looked up. His face was full of anger. "You can't be serious," he said loudly. The children immediately became silent. "I said I'm sorry," I replied softly. David shook his head. "Sorry? That's all you ever say." I felt my stomach tighten. "David!" "No," he interrupted. "Look at this mess. You can't even carry a bowl across the room." The room felt colder. Madison lowered her eyes to the table. Noah stopped smiling. I wanted David to stop. I wanted him to realize the children were watching, but he continued. "You know what's embarrassing?" he said. "The fact that you mess up everything." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The children were right there. "Please," I whispered. But he wasn't finished. "I work all day to support this family, and you can't even do one simple thing correctly." His words hit me harder than I expected. I felt tears building in my eyes. Still, I tried to stay calm, not for me, for the children. Noah looked frightened. Madison's face had gone pale. I forced a smile. The kind of smile people use when they're trying not to break apart. "It's okay," I said quietly. "I'll clean it up." David leaned back in his chair. "You always say that after you create a problem." Nobody spoke. The silence was unbearable. I knelt down and started picking up the broken pieces. My hands were shaking. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, especially my children's. At that moment, I didn't care about the broken bowl. I didn't care about dinner. I didn't even care about David's cruel words. What broke my heart was the look on Madison's face. She wasn't looking at the floor. She wasn't looking at the shattered bowl. She was looking at me, and in her eyes, I saw something I would never forget. Pain, confusion, and disappointment. That was the moment I realized something terrifying. My children weren't learning how to treat people. They were learning how to treat me. And that night, as I sat on the kitchen floor, surrounded by broken pieces of ceramic, I had no idea that this was only the beginning of the hardest chapter of our lives. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes. I had cried quietly after everyone went to bed. I didn't want Madison or Noah to hear me. They had already seen enough. When I walked into the kitchen, David was drinking coffee and reading the news on his phone. He looked at me and smiled. "Morning," he said, as if nothing had happened. I stood there for a moment, confused. How could he act so normal? How could someone humiliate his wife in front of his children one night and pretend everything was fine the next morning? "Morning," I replied softly. He kissed Noah on the head before leaving for work. He told Madison, "Have a great day at school." Then he looked at me. "See you tonight." The front door closed behind him. I stood in complete silence. It was as if I had imagined everything, but I hadn't. The broken bowl was gone. The broken feeling inside me was not. Over the next few weeks, I noticed changes in my children. Small changes at first, then changes I could no longer ignore. Noah had always been a cheerful little boy. He loved drawing superheroes and building tall towers with colorful blocks. Now, every time he made a mistake, he immediately whispered, "I'm sorry." One afternoon, he accidentally spilled a little milk on the kitchen table. Before I could grab a towel, he looked at me with fear in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said quickly. "Please don't be mad." My heart sank. I wasn't upset about the milk. I was upset because my 8-year-old son looked terrified over a simple accident. I hugged him tightly. "It's okay, sweetheart," I whispered. "Accidents happen." He held on to me for a long time, as if he needed to hear those words more than I realized. Madison changed too. She became quieter every day. She spent more time alone in her room. She stopped telling me funny stories about school. She no longer laughed as loudly as she used to. One evening, I found her erasing the same sentence in her homework over and over again. The paper had almost torn. "Madison," I said gently, "it's okay if it's not perfect." She didn't look up. "I don't want to make mistakes." "You don't have to be perfect." She finally looked at me. Her eyes were filled with worry. "Dad gets angry when people make mistakes." I felt something heavy settle inside my chest. She wasn't talking only about homework. She was talking about life. That night, after the children were asleep, I sat alone in the living room. I kept thinking about everything that had happened. David had never hit me. He had never broken furniture. He had never shouted every single day. But his words stayed in our home long after he stopped speaking. They lived in the silence. They lived in my children's fear. I had spent years telling myself it wasn't that bad. Now I wondered if I had been lying to myself. A few days later, Madison asked if we could walk to the neighborhood park together. The autumn air was cool. Golden leaves covered the ground. For a while, we walked without saying anything. Then she quietly reached for my hand. "Mom?" "Yes, sweetheart?" She looked straight ahead. Her voice was barely louder than a whisper. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." She took a deep breath. "Is it normal?" She paused. "For husbands to talk to their wives the way Dad talks to you?" My steps stopped. The world around me seemed to disappear. Children were laughing nearby. Dogs were barking. Cars passed on the road. But all I could hear was my daughter's question. I opened my mouth. No words came out. How could I answer her? If I said yes, I would teach her to accept disrespect. If I said no, I would have to admit the truth about our family. I knelt beside her and gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face. "You deserve to be treated with kindness," I finally said, "and so do you." She gave me a small, sad smile. We walked home holding hands, but neither of us spoke again. That night, after everyone was asleep, I passed Madison's bedroom. Her desk lamp was still on. The room was empty. She must have gone to get a glass of water. A small notebook lay open on her desk. I knew I shouldn't look. Every child deserves privacy. But something inside me whispered that I needed to understand what my daughter was carrying in her heart. My hands trembled as I looked down at the page. One sentence was written in careful, neat handwriting. "I hope that when I grow up, I never marry someone who makes me feel as small as Mom." The tears came before I could stop them. At that moment, I realized the deepest wound in our home wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to my children. And for the first time in my life, I understood that staying silent was hurting them far more than I had ever imagined. Madison's diary stayed in my mind like a voice I couldn't silence. "I hope that when I grow up, I never marry someone who makes me feel as small as Mom." I read those words over and over in my heart. For years, I believed I was protecting my children by keeping our family together. I thought staying quiet would keep peace in our home. Instead, my silence had become a lesson. It was teaching my daughter that a woman should endure humiliation. It was teaching my son that a husband could speak to his wife without respect. That truth hurt more than anything David had ever said to me. The next morning, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. I looked tired. The woman staring back at me didn't look like the happy teacher who loved helping children learn. She looked frightened. She looked lost. I touched my reflection and whispered, "You have to be stronger." Not for yourself, for Madison, for Noah. That afternoon, after school, I called my older sister Rachel. We hadn't spoken deeply in months. I had always told her everything was fine. This time, I couldn't pretend anymore. "Sarah?" she answered warmly. "Is everything okay?" The moment I heard her voice, I started crying. I couldn't stop. Between tears, I told her everything. The cruel comments, the dinner, the broken bowl, Madison's question at the park, the diary. Rachel stayed quiet until I finished. Then she spoke softly. "You've been carrying this alone for too long." "I thought I could fix it," I whispered. "You didn't break this, Sarah." Her words made me cry even harder. For the first time in years, someone wasn't blaming me. A few days later, Rachel helped me find a therapist. I was nervous before my first appointment. I almost canceled. Part of me kept saying, "Maybe you're making this a bigger problem than it is." But another voice answered, "If your daughter came to you with this story, what would you tell her?" I knew the answer. I would tell her she deserved respect. So I walked into the therapist's office. She listened carefully as I shared my story. When I finished, she asked one simple question. "Sarah, when was the last time someone spoke to you with kindness?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. I honestly couldn't remember. That realization broke my heart. Over the next few weeks, I continued going to therapy. Slowly, I began to understand something important. Emotional abuse doesn't always leave bruises. Sometimes it steals your confidence one cruel word at a time. It makes you believe you're the problem. It makes you apologize for simply existing. I decided to make small changes. I started reading books again. I went for evening walks with the children. I laughed more. I stopped apologizing every time something went wrong. The children noticed. Madison smiled more often. Noah laughed louder. For the first time in months, our home felt lighter. David noticed the changes too. One evening, he watched me helping Noah with his homework. "You seem different," he said. "I feel different," I answered calmly. He frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm learning to respect myself." He laughed, but this time it sounded uneasy. "Oh, please. Someone's filling your head with nonsense." I stayed quiet. He stepped closer. "So now you think I'm the bad guy?" "I didn't say that." "You don't have to." His voice grew sharper. "You've always been too sensitive." "I don't think I am." "You always overreact." I looked directly into his eyes. For years, I would have apologized. This time, I didn't. "You embarrassed me in front of our children," I said quietly. "I was joking," he replied. "No." My voice was steady. "You weren't joking." He rolled his eyes. "It wasn't a big deal." "It was. It happened once. It happened enough." He crossed his arms. "So now I'm a terrible husband." I took a slow breath. Then I said the words I had been carrying inside my heart. "No, David. You were teaching our children something." He looked confused. "You were teaching Madison that it's normal for a husband to humiliate his wife. You were teaching Noah that this is how a man should treat the woman he loves." The room became completely silent. For the first time since our marriage began falling apart, David had no answer. He looked away, but he still didn't apologize. Instead, he grabbed his car keys. "I can't deal with this right now." The front door slammed behind him. I stood alone in the living room. My hands were shaking. Not because I was afraid, because I had finally spoken the truth. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed, I walked into our bedroom. I opened the closet. I pulled out a small suitcase. One by one, I folded my clothes inside. Then I packed a few outfits for Madison, a few for Noah. I wasn't sure where we would go. I wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring. But as I quietly zipped the suitcase closed, I realized something had changed inside me. For the first time in many years, I was no longer packing out of fear. I was packing with hope. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. The house was quiet. For a few moments, I simply sat on the edge of my bed, looking at the suitcase beside me. I wasn't running away. I was walking toward a better future. I gently woke Madison and Noah. They looked at me with sleepy eyes. "Are we going somewhere?" Noah asked. I smiled softly. "Yes," I said. "We're going to stay with Aunt Rachel for a little while." Neither of them asked many questions. Somehow, I think they already understood. When David came downstairs, he froze. He looked at the suitcase. Then he looked at me. "What is this?" he asked. "I'm leaving." His face changed from surprise to anger. "You're serious?" "Yes." "This is ridiculous." I remained calm. "I'm not leaving because of one dinner." He crossed his arms. "Then why?" I looked at Madison and Noah. They were standing quietly behind me. "I'm leaving because our children deserve to grow up in a home where kindness is normal." David laughed bitterly. "So you're breaking this family apart?" I shook my head. "No." The family started breaking the day respect disappeared. For the first time, he had nothing to say. I picked up the suitcase. Madison took my hand. Noah held onto my jacket. Without another word, we walked out the front door. The cold morning air touched my face. Instead of fear, I felt peace. Living with Rachel wasn't easy. Her apartment was small. The three of us shared one bedroom. Money became tight. I worked extra hours at school and tutored children in the evenings. Some nights I was so tired that I fell asleep while reading. But every morning I woke up knowing my children had slept without fear. Slowly, little changes began to happen. Noah laughed again. Not the nervous laugh he used when trying to avoid trouble. A real laugh. The kind that filled an entire room. One afternoon, he accidentally dropped a glass of juice. He looked at me with wide eyes. Then he stopped. He took a deep breath. "I'm sorry, Mom." I smiled and handed him a towel. "It's okay. We'll clean it together." He smiled back. For the first time in months, he believed me. Madison changed too. She started inviting friends over after school. She joined the school's art club. One evening, I found her painting a beautiful picture of a sunrise. At the bottom of the page, she had written one sentence. "Every morning is another chance." I quietly wiped away my tears. Months passed. Life wasn't perfect. Bills were sometimes difficult to pay. I worried about the future, but our home was peaceful. There were no cruel words, no frightened silence, only laughter, homework, movie nights, and simple dinners around a small kitchen table. One afternoon, my phone rang. It was David. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. Hello? His voice sounded different, quieter. I was wondering if we could meet. A week later, we sat across from each other in a small coffee shop. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, David looked down at his hands. I've been seeing a counselor, he said. I listened without interrupting. I kept telling myself I wasn't doing anything wrong. His voice shook. But after you left, I came home to an empty house every day. He swallowed hard. I finally understood that I didn't lose my family in one day. I lost them one cruel word at a time. Tears filled his eyes. I'm sorry, Sarah. I should have respected you. I should have protected you. I should have been a better husband and a better father. For a long moment, I simply looked at him. Then I nodded. I forgive you. He looked up hopefully. Does that mean you'll come home? I smiled sadly. No. Forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. I truly hope you continue to grow, I said gently. But my children and I have already begun a new life. He lowered his head. This time he didn't argue. He simply whispered, I understand. As I walked away from the coffee shop, I felt lighter than I had in years. That evening, Madison wrapped her arms around me in the kitchen. Mom? Yes? She smiled through happy tears. Thank you. For what? For showing me what a strong woman looks like. I hugged her tightly. Noah joined our hug, laughing as he squeezed between us. In that moment, I realized we hadn't lost our family. We had rebuilt it. It looked different. It wasn't perfect. But it was filled with love, respect, and peace. Today, when I look back on the hardest chapter of my life, I no longer remember the broken bowl first. I remember the day I stopped believing that silence could protect the people I loved. I learned that love without respect slowly becomes pain. Children may forget the words we tell them, but they never forget the example we set. The greatest gift I could give Madison and Noah was not a perfect home. It was the courage to choose a healthy one. And if my story teaches you anything, I hope it is this. Never stay where your dignity is slowly being taken away. Real love does not humiliate. Real love does not make you feel small. Real love lifts you up, even on your weakest days. And sometimes, the strongest goodbye becomes the first step toward the happiest beginning.